Good morning. As most of you know, David and I have just returned from a couple of weeks in India with Swami Kriyananda. So it's nice to have been with him, of course, and it's lovely to be back. Hello. I'm greeting a friend from India in the back there. Nice to see you here. Surprise. This verse from the Gita, which Swamiji has repeated for the second time in this reading, when virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate to obliterate the evil and to bring forth the good. This is dramatically demonstrated in the life of Lord Krishna. This is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, so it's Krishna himself talking about himself as an example of a divine incarnation. And the life story of Krishna is from a young age. He was destined, predicted to be the one who was going to destroy his evil uncle Kamsa, who was tyrannizing the people. And there's a tremendous dramatic story about the pre-birth story about Krishna, is how his uncle imprisoned his destined parents and every one of their children. When the baby was born, he took the baby away and he killed the baby because it had been predicted that their child would slay him, and he was determined that he was going to outwit fate. And so 8 of their children, or 7 of their children, were all murdered in this way, and they were kept in this dungeon. And finally the 8th child is born, and it's Krishna, and it's a stormy night, and magic happens, and the guards are mysteriously put to sleep, and the doors are opened, and Vasudeva the father is able to take the child out and hide him somewhere, and then a magical being takes the place of the baby, and all of these extraordinary things happen. Some of them may have actually happened, some of them may just be an attempt. Many myths are created because human beings feel something, and they have a genuine experience that so far transcends ordinary human experience that in an effort to put words on that experience, they have to move into the supernatural in order to describe it. You know, this transcendent power of the birth of this divine incarnation, we can't just have it be that some woman somewhere gave birth to a baby, because that just doesn't begin to describe it. So we begin to embellish and embellish and embellish until we have these stories that no longer quite make rational sense, which causes some very rational people to reject the whole idea, but it presents in a way that the hard facts could not present what the actual experience is. Because the experience is, as Krishna describes, virtue has declined. And as I was saying, in his life and time, there was a tyrant in place, and then Krishna killed that tyrant as a young man and took his place on the throne. And then this further epic struggle develops, which becomes the Mahabharata, which again takes history and then confuses it with myth. But nonetheless, there was an historical fact of this fight between the family of Krishna, his cousins, and this other family, and they were fighting for the kingdom, and then they went to war, and in the end, virtue triumphed. But at what cost? You know, in human terms, this was a devastating war, and all of the things that everyone was attached to were destroyed, and so it becomes very complicated. That's what life is like. I was just reflecting, meditating before I stood up. You know, this has been a very interesting week, like all weeks are. And it's just been filled with, on one hand, I receive in the mail a sort of New Year's greeting cards from this extended family, a family that we've known for a long time, a baby a young child that we blessed here in the temple years ago is now standing there with his beautiful wife holding babies of his own. You know, time has passed, and there's all these just beautiful young people and their beautiful spouses and their beautiful babies and their beautiful babies in the womb, and then there's the proud patriarch of the whole family. I mean, there's no way to look at it anyway except, wow, what a family, what incredible stuff is happening with these people. And then at the same time, the phone rings and the emails come, and so is ill, and such and so aged person's dementia has advanced, and this person's health is suddenly in jeopardy, and this person's fertility has been completely determined that they'll never have a child. And it's just like, isn't that what it always is? I mean, just review the cycle of your own life. Every time there's something rising like this, there's also something that's sinking on the other side, and then it all shifts its place, and that which was down goes up. And if we're looking to say that this is a beautiful world because nothing difficult happens in it, we're going to have a really hard time making that true, isn't it so? I'm just walking down the street the other day, and there's a lot of for lease signs up. There's a lot of good bargains to be had, going out of business, going out of business, going out of business. And even situations that are sincerely and well expressed are just facing technology. I'm going by blockbusters. I mean, who would have thought that blockbusters would have been in danger? Except all of a sudden Netflix is eating up all of those stores. And then David reminds me that Netflix is being eaten by movies on demand. And who knows what is going to happen next. And in other words, business as usual is very hard to carry on these days, isn't it? And nobody really quite knows where things are going. But nobody ever knows where things are going. It's just a little more dramatic right now, isn't it? So this verse of the Gita, which is generally used to explain avatars, which is something very important to explain. How do these divine beings come, and why do they come, and who are they, and how do we relate to them? But scripture can be taken on all levels, and it just has this very simple phrase: whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate. I become present. I manifest myself. Now, we're talking, as I said, about divine consciousness taking human birth, as he did in Jesus, as it did in Krishna. But we're also talking about the eternally resurrecting principle of divine awareness, which is always the background text of every experience that we have in life. I was speaking to someone just a few days ago, and they were talking to me about an awakening awareness for themselves that perhaps something other than the conventional path that was laid out in front of them is really what their heart is longing for. They're having a hard time seeing the point of just striving for money and position in this world, and are longing for some deeper meaning. I mean, of course, it's a message that resonates with my own reality, so I was very supportive. But the orientation that this person had at this point was very discouraged, looking at the way the world is, looking at all the bad things that happen, looking at the seeming hopelessness of so many problems. Our poor young people, in our desire to make them conscious of what is important in this world, especially the ecological issues of the planet. We've made such a point to them that the planet is in so much trouble and that we've messed it up, but you have to save it. And these poor kids are sitting there like, now they have on their shoulders the burden of saving this planet. It's not surprising that a few of them are a little bit depressed, a little overwhelmed. And so my friend is talking like this. She's talking about this sort of overwhelming impossibility of the circumstances that she sees around her. So I asked her, I said, well, which way is your consciousness going? Are you feeling that it's just so overwhelming that there's just simply nothing that can be done about it? I said, because at the end of that road is suicide. And that's you see every so often, and we've had it right in our own community here, you see this rash of youthful suicide. because the thought is, it just can't be solved. There's nothing that can be done about it. All the weight is on my shoulders, and I can't carry that weight, and the only possibility is to try to run away from it. I said, or is the direction of your thought going that even though this all seems impossible, I feel that there simply must be another alternative. That it's not so much a rejection of the possibility of hope. It's just the realization that perhaps hope doesn't lie in the direction that the world is trying to push me. And to my great relief, she said, oh, I know that there's a solution. I just don't know what it is right now. Now you see what a difference there is between those two realities? But what we have to understand that as mature devotees, we can't live in just some fantasy world that says, oh, I'm a good person and I'm a devotee and God loves me and God got me this nice apartment and He really wants me to have good things and like this. Because sooner or later these scales of life just seem to shift, don't they? Old age, disease, and death, that's what the Buddha talked about. The threefold miseries. And I'm not really a miserable person in any way. I'm quite cheerful, in fact, because I know that there is hope. It just lies in another arena. And so many of us are forced by circumstances sooner or later. Maybe we have a little bit of good karma. Maybe we even get through a couple of lifetimes where everything just goes really super. But as Swami Kriyananda said, you see someone who's living out a lifetime in which everything is flowing effortlessly, you don't see all the incarnations of effort that went into bringing them to such a point where such a thing would happen. All that we have to do in order to discipline ourselves and to earn that kind of good karma. And who's even to say whether that's the best karma? All it does necessarily is just reinforce, oh, look, I can make this world work and I don't need God. I can just have my own powers and it'll be just fine. And sooner or later, something happens. I have a very aged relative now who's, suffering ill health and dementia. And you see all of the accomplishment of that life, which on some level still exists, but old age has just completely changed the here and now experience. If we concentrate too much on that and think that's the only reality, where do we go? But you see, this world is manifested out of the divine spirit. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word is that Om vibration. And that Om vibration, whenever we touch into it, consciously, by direct yogic practice, or just by grace, by just that moment that comes, whether it comes in a tremendous emergency, whether it comes when you're just walking down the street, but just every so often the curtain parts and we realize that there's this completely other force happening. And that force is blissful and that force is benign. People will tell you that they have that experience in the foxhole in the war, in the birth of a child, in the moment just before they think their life is going to end, in the grief of some almost unbearable experience, just suddenly underneath it comes this touch of grace. And it's very confusing to the human mind, isn't it? Because I'm supposed to be miserable. This is a miserable experience, but here I am also at the same time. Because this is the nature of life. There's this overlay of ever-changing reality. And it's not really that it's either good or bad. It's simply dual. The word is the vibration of Om. From the perfect stillness of the Spirit moved across the water. That's how the Bible describes it. The wind of Spirit moved across the water, and the waters began to vibrate. And the waves began to go up, and the waves began to go down. This entire world that we're looking at, even scientifically, it's a vibration of energy. And because it vibrates, it looks a certain way and creates a certain illusion. Just like Swamiji says it, when a propeller is still, you can see that it's these separate blades. But when that propeller begins to spin, it gives the illusion that there's this whole circle of force, doesn't it? And as long as it's spinning quickly, that's what you think it is. But it isn't really, it just appears to be because of the movement. So this world moves in one direction and then it moves in another. We're young, we're full of hope, we have all this power and beauty in ourselves, and then we crest, and then it begins to come down this other direction. Maybe it comes down with a sense of tremendous satisfaction. But the body begins to fade. I watch myself now just going up a stair. It's the most remarkable thing to me when I have to just take one leg and just step up. And I suddenly just find that it's like there's this kind of energy required, And I try to think to myself, it wasn't like that before. I used to just put my foot on the stair and then with one leg I'd pull my body up. And now that same leg just has a whole different attitude about it. I watched Swamiji, we were with him, and he's 83, 84 now. And his body he has powerful will, but his body's not strong. And I watch him just before he has to go upstairs, you'll see him. He kind of pulls himself together, and then he goes up the stairs, but it just takes all this conscious, deliberate effort in order to do what you used to just do naturally with your physical body. And it's just time. And is that inherently a negative thing? Well, you see, it's only negative if I've defined myself and gained my happiness, and my sense of self-esteem and self-worth is based on the fact that look how strong and capable I am. Look how well my physical body works. Look at what a beautiful and effective young person I am. And then I have to make that awful little noise going up that stair. But all I'm doing is going up the stair, and I can still go up the stair, and maybe someday I won't be able to go up the stair. Inherently, you see, it's just an experience. But whether it becomes a happy or a sad experience depends on what I have invested in it being in a certain way. And life itself is just movement. It's just one thing after another, and the inevitable flow of ups and downs and age and youth and so on. But depending on how much of our happiness we have invested in it remaining a certain way, to that extent exactly we suffer or we don't suffer. And all that God is really trying to teach us, He doesn't really care, actually. Swamiji sometimes is just brutally frank in this. We make God's love for us all about the nice things He does for us. Swami says He just doesn't care. We think He wants us to be happy. He wants us to be divinely conscious. Happy to us often means that we get to keep this little tiny self-definition. I was once several times in fact, in India, at this, the name escapes me right now, Prayag, something, the union of two rivers on our way up to Badrinath, which is a place in the Himalayas, a very holy place, Devaprayag. And it's a place where two rivers come together. In America, where everything is run by lawsuits, you never actually get to be in incredibly dangerous places. But in India, where they're just not quite so organized and they haven't quite got that system together yet, you can risk your life just all the time. So this is considered a very holy place, and it's especially holy right where the two rivers come together. And so you're up on this canyon, and you go down these many steps, and there's a big school and a temple and all these things built there, and you keep going down these steps, and you finally get to this little cement platform, which is about the size of, a little smaller than this dais up here. And it comes down to this little point, and there's actually stairs just like this, and these two huge rivers. I don't just mean like little dribbling rivers, but huge rivers, some hundreds of yards across, with this extraordinary power just racing down, merge just right over this little platform, And because it's very holy, it's considered very holy to go into the water right at that junction. So you have something like a little chain that you hold onto as you go down these stairs like this. It's really dangerous. When we were there with our whole pilgrimage group, we had Jocelyn Black with us, who's about 6 feet tall and is an EMT. She's an emergency medical professional, and she's a really strong girl. And we said, Jocelyn, why don't you station yourself there? When all of us less hardy people go down those steps. The motto of our pilgrimages was never lost a pilgrim, and we really didn't want to start. But it was irresistible to want to go into the water, even though it was cold. And we held on to the chains and we held on to each other. And it wasn't like you were going to get swept away. There was enough sense to it. But standing there, and of course nature is a more elemental expression of the divine. It's not so confused by human overlay. God is equally present everywhere. It's very important to realize that. But he's more clearly perceived in some places. So standing there watching those two rivers come together, you could just feel what the power of spirit really is. And I remembered standing there, Swamiji says, sometimes Master, who could be so extremely sweet, could also be just very transcendent in his perspective. And he said these words, this is how Swamiji explained it. Master once said, Yogananda I'm speaking of when I say Master, he said, God eats people. And then he said, and then Master went like this, just sort of showing that the one incarnation, you see, that is very important to us because I'm in this body and I like this body and my happiness has now become dependent upon staying in this body. Of course, we will never be able to stay in this body except for just a moment. Even if it's 95 years, it goes by just like that, So we get our happiness from staying in this body, and then this body begins to die, and we define that as a terrible, loss. But to God, it's just we're in this body, we're out of this body, we're in another one. It's just we're in this process of coming to divine awareness. So he just eats our bodies. It doesn't make any difference. So I'm standing there watching these rivers. And I don't have a suicidal inclination, but I do have a fascination with how transitory this world is. And I just saw how easy it would be, just slip in that. And I also could feel how little it would matter in the cosmic sense. I knew if I slipped into that water, there would be an enormous amount of consternation behind me. Because I was watching everyone else and hoping they didn't slip into that water. So it's real on both levels, you see. The human body is a great opportunity to realize God, and human life is not to be squandered. It is, in fact, a sin to squander your incarnation, to just throw away your body. Because your body is given to you for a very serious purpose, which is to use the experiences that you have through it to come to a deeper understanding of the presence of God everywhere. Virtue declining is wisdom declining, is bliss declining. And whenever virtue declines, God takes visible form so that ignorance can be transcended and bliss restored. And the drama of one individual's incarnation is just a big story of the constant little story that we're always living, which is we go through this endless cycle of virtue declining. And I don't mean that we become, immoral, but to the extent that we allow ourselves to be defined by something other than the eternal, then our bliss starts getting nibbled away, doesn't it? This body hurts, someone I love is suffering, my plans are disappointed, my heart is broken, my ambitions are not going to be realized, and then all of a sudden bliss has declined because I've defined myself by being able to just step right up that stair. And now time has passed and I can't do it. I've defined myself by this person behaving in a certain way and being my so-and-so and doing this for me. And now they've gone a different direction. I've defined myself by the fulfillment of my financial ambitions, and now it may not happen. Virtue has declined, bliss has declined. But even in that moment, the divine will incarnate within us if we direct our energy and attention toward that reality. Life is just a constant practice of meditation. Not just meditation when we're formally meditating, but meditation is the turning of our attention away from the transitory to perceive and experience the eternal. And in the midst of anything, whatever moment it might be, that eternal is always there. There's no point in our experience when we are not standing in the presence of God. It is just a question of how aware we are of that reality. You know, I think that's such good news. When I was younger, I used to get bored so easily. And I used to become so disinterested. But now that there's the spiritual path, now that we understand that there's never a single instant when we are not in the presence of God, doesn't that always give us something so interesting to do? You know? Because that divine awareness slips away from us. But all we have to do then is seek it again. Just come back one more time. Oh, my virtue has declined. My bliss has left me. Let me reincarnate the divine spirit within me and be aware of that divinity. You know, life will go one way or another. We don't stand still. We're either going, shrinking, dying, or we're living, expanding, knowing. And the birth and death of the body, the success and failure of our human lives, the goodness or the lack of goodness around us, friends, that's the condition. The waves go up and down. Our consciousness, however, you see, that's what we can experience, and that's what we can always live in. We can never hold the ocean still, but we can dive to the depths where the waves have ceased to trouble us. This is what God is offering us. In the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was the Divine Spirit, and our responsibility is singular, to live in that reality. Bless you.